In the Straits of Messina, off the coast of Sicily, lived two horrid monsters of Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis. They plagued the narrow waters of Messina, laying waste to any passing ships and sailors. But these two were not once monsters. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful naiad called Scylla, who was loved by the fish god Glaucus, but would not return his love, for she was repulsed by his fish form. Glaucus went to the goddess and sorceress, Circe, to prepare him a love potion, which would make Scylla show him affection. However, Circe herself falls in love with Glaucus and tries to woo him. But Glaucus would not reciprocate, for he was in love with another. He was in love with Scylla. Jealous, Circe became hateful of her rival, and brewed a vial of poison, with which she would carry out her wicked intent. And on a fateful day, while Scylla was bathing in the sea, the jealous Circe poured the poisonous potion into the sea water, transforming Scylla into a dreadful monster with 6 beastly heads, on 6 long snaky necks, with 4 eyes and 3 rows of sharp shark's teeth on each of the heads. Her body sprouted 12 tentacles in place of legs, and a cat's tail, and from her waist sprouted 6 dogs' heads. She was a fright to behold, a thing of terror, even to herself. In a slightly different version, it was the sea god, Poseidon, who fell in love with Scylla, and so his married wife, Queen Amphitrite, transformed her into that frightful monster, out of jealousy. In this form, Scylla attacked the ships of any passing sailors, seizing and devouring one of the crew, with each of her heads. This became the fate of Odysseus' men, when they dared cross the forbidden territory of Scylla. The hero, Hercules, would encounter Scylla on his journey to Sicily, and eventually kill her. But Scylla's father, the river deity, Phorcys, would apply flaming torches to her body, bringing her back to life. On the other hand, Charybdis was the daughter of the sea god, Pontus, and the earth goddess, Gaia, and was a deadly whirlpool, located opposite Scylla. 3 times a day, Charybdis would pull in and push out water, with a force so much that ships would be drowned. Like Scylla, Charybdis was originally a beautiful woman. She was the immortal pretty daughter of the primordial sea and earth, cursed by the king of all the gods, Zeus, because she stole the cattle belonging to his son, Hercules, and helped his brother, Poseidon, increase his watery territory by flooding lands with water. This is the story of Scylla and Charybdis. The dreadful monster, Lamia, was once the beautiful queen of Libya, who was loved by Zeus and bore him a son. When his wife, Hera, queen of the gods, learned of their affair, she cursed Lamia with monstrosity and permanent sleeplessness. Lamia turned into a half-human half-snake, forced to eat her own children, her offspring with Zeus, and the children of others, henceforth. But Lamia did not only eat children, she ate grown men too. She would seduce young men to satisfy their sexual appetite, and then feed on their flesh afterward. Lamia is sometimes associated with the Empussy, the man-eating seductress's children of Hecate, goddess of the night, sorcery and necromancy.
In the time of the primordial gods, ancient titans, and giants, after the battle between the titans and the gods, the mother of the earth, Gaia, was angered by the destruction of her children, the Titans, and so sought to bear another child, more powerful than anything in the universe, powerful enough to overthrow the Olympians. Gaia mated with Tartarus, the Dark Abyss, and from their union came Typhon, the greatest monster of all, an extremely horrid creature, with immeasurable strength. In a slightly different version, Typhon was the son of Cronus and Hera. After a big quarrel with Zeus, an angry Hera visited their father, Cronus, whom Zeus had defeated, and asked for a way to overthrow Zeus. Cronus handed Hera 2 eggs, covered in his own semen, and told her to bury them, that from those eggs, the one who would overthrow Zeus would be born. Hera buried the eggs in Cilicia, but before Typhon emerged, Hera had reconciled with Zeus and told him what she had done. Whichever the story is, there was never a creature as monstrous as Typhon. Typhon was horrifying, cruel, lawless, and immensely ferocious. On his shoulders were 100 snake heads that breathed fire and made terrible noise. He never tired nor slept. So huge was he that his heads touched the skies, and from the eyes of his 100 heads, fire flashed and burned as he glared. The mountains trembled at the hisses, the bellows, the roars, and every kind of noise that came from his heads. He was the bane of gods and mortals alike. Typhon surpassed all other Gaia's children, both in strength and in size. A poison-spitting viper, he was. From the waist above, he had a human form. From below the waist, he had snake coils as legs, and above the shoulders was an army of venomous snake heads, with his main head at the center, having tattered hair, an unkempt beard, and fiery eyes. One of his hands reached out to the west, and the other hand to the east, and in place of his fingers were 100 dragons' heads. Typhon married a fellow monster, Echidna, the mother of monsters, and had a number of monstrous children. His children were the Ladon, the 2-headed Orthrus, the Sphinx, the Nimean lion, the 3-headed Cerberus, the Learnean Hydra, and the Chimera. When the enormous and powerful Typhon was ready, he set out to do what he was born to do, to overthrow Zeus. Typhon began to hurl big fiery rocks at the gods. He spat poison at them, he blasted fire at them. In order to escape this mad monster, most of the gods transformed into animals and fled to Egypt, except Athena and Zeus, who stayed behind, and Hades and Poseidon, who remained in their territories. Apollo transformed into a hawk, Hermes, an ibis, Ares, a fish, Artemis, a cat, Dionysus, a goat, Heracles, a fawn, Hephaestus, an ox, and Leto, a mouse. When the warrior goddess, Athena, urged her father Zeus to fight for his children and all of Olympus, Zeus set out to meet his supposed bane. He and Typhon engaged in an earth-shaking battle, which caused the realm of Hades to tremble, and the seas of Poseidon to rage. Even Tartarus shook beneath the feet of the 2 fighting gods. Who would the victor be? The king of the gods, or the king of monsters? The 2 gods struggled and strained, Typhon pouring fire and venom, and Zeus hurling lightning and thunderbolts. The sky god dealt huge strikes at his opponent with his thunderbolts, severing many of the monster's snake heads. After a long time of struggling, Zeus was finally able to restrain Typhon's arms, and fired thunderbolts at the monster with great might. Typhon fell to the earth with a loud crash, burnt and maimed. Zeus had conquered him. The king of the gods had won. Typhon met the same fate as his Titan brothers. Zeus cast him into Tartarus and placed a huge mountain, known as Mount Etna, over him, to make sure he never escaped. It is believed that volcanic eruptions are caused by Typhon in his efforts to escape. This is the myth of Typhon. in the land far away from the deathless gods and mortal men. In the deepest caves of Arima, lived a half-maiden, half-snake creature, who preyed on unaware travelers. Echidna, the mother of all monsters. The she-viper, the half-nymph half-serpent. The one who was neither, like mortal men, nor the undying gods. Some say, Echidna was the daughter of Tartarus and Gaia. Some say she was the daughter of the primordial sea god, Phorcys, and his consort, Ceto, the goddess of the dangers of the deep. While others say, she was the daughter of the river goddess Styx. In appearance, Echidna was an irresistible, yet fearsome creature, with the beautiful upper body of a young maiden, and the lower body of a viper. She was half a nymph, with enchanting eyes, and fair cheeks, and half again, a huge snake, great, and awful. She was an ageless creature, who never grew old, all her days. Echidna consorted with a fellow monster, known as Typhon, the father of all monsters, and from the union of these two monsters, came nothing but monsters. The most famous of their children were, Cerberus, the three-headed hound, who guarded the gates of Hades, the Learnean Hydra, the many-headed serpent, that grew two heads if one was cut off, the Sphinx, a winged half-woman, half-lion creature, that guarded the road to Thebes, and the Chimera, a creature with the head of a lion, a goat's body, and a snake as its tail. Echidna would lie in wait, in her caves, for unwary passers-by, and animals. Whichever unfortunate victim fell into her trap, she carried off, and fed upon. However, after the powerful Typhon was defeated, at the hands of Zeus, Echidna soon met her own death. She was killed, while sleeping, by the hundred-eyed giant, Argus Panoptis, who was sent by Hera. In a different version though, Echidna remained alive, after the defeat of her husband, Typhon, and continued living in the caves of Arima, carrying off passers-by. Once upon a time of myths and monsters, the earth, Gaia, brought forth new children, after the imprisonment of her very first set of children, and the overthrow of the Titans, the old order of gods. Fathered by the gloomy pit, Tartarus, the most famous of these later children were Typhon and Echidna, both of whom were an epitome of monstrosity. Typhon was undoubtedly the king of all monsters, and Echidna, the queen. So when Typhon wanted a consort, who else was more fitting, if not Echidna, the only other creature in the universe, who looked like him? From the union of these two monsters, a new generation of monsters was born. Horrifying and vicious, they were gifted with incredible strength, and came in all forms and sizes. 1. Cerberus. Also known as the Hound of Hades, Cerberus was the gigantic three-headed dog, who faithfully guarded the gates of the underworld. Strong and relentless, these beasts fed on raw flesh, and had a terrifyingly loud voice. As its duty, Cerberus prevented the dead from leaving the realm of Hades, and made sure that no soul, who entered, ever returned to the world of the living. Like its master, Hades, Cerberus was strict and unyielding. Only 3 heroes in all of Greek myths managed to outsmart this beast when they visited the underworld. Heracles achieved it with his strength, Orpheus with his music, and Aeneas with the aid of the Sibyl of Cumae, who bribed Cerberus with a honey cake. 2. The Learnean Hydra. The Learnean Hydra was a hideous water serpent, which had many heads that grew 2 more if one was cut off. This monster resided in the lake of Lerna, in the region of Argolid, which no one dared to venture. It had a poisonous breath, and its blood was so venomous that the mere scent of this monster could kill anyone who perceived it. Whatever its blood tainted, perished. The Hydra was eventually killed by Heracles, with the help of his nephew, Iolaus. Heracles cut off the monster's heads, while his nephew burnt the stumps, so 2 more heads would not grow back. 3. Orthrus. Orthrus was the two-headed dog, who lived with Geryon, the three-bodied, three-headed giant. Geryon owned a herd of cattle in the land of Erythea, where Orthrus helped him keep guard of them. Orthrus and his master, Geryon, were killed by the hero, Heracles, during his 12 labors. 4. The Sphinx. The Sphinx was a winged creature, with the body of a lion and the head of a woman, that guarded the road to Thebes. It would stop travelers and ask them a riddle. If the traveler failed her riddle, or refused to answer, the Sphinx killed and ate them. When the ill-fated prince, Oedipus, answered her riddle correctly, the Sphinx, in madness, threw herself off the cliff, to her death. No one had ever solved her riddle, till then. 5. The Ladon. The Ladon was a multi-headed dragon, which guarded the golden apples, in the garden of the Hesperides. Like Orthrus, the Ladon was not as famous as its other siblings. The most known encounter with this monster was during the 12 labors of Heracles, where Heracles killed it, in order to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. In a different story, the Ladon was never killed, because Heracles never went to the garden. Instead, he tricked the Titan, Atlas, into retrieving the apples for him, thereby completing his task. 6. The Chimera. The Chimera was a ferocious monster that had the heads of both a lion and a goat, and a serpent as its tail. This hybrid creature dwelt in a small part of Lycia, scorching and terrorizing the region, until the fateful day when it was killed by the hero, Bellerophon. 7. The Nimean lion. The Nimean lion was a very large and powerful beast, with an impenetrable skin of gold and sharp claws that could cut through any armor. This fearsome creature dwelt in the land of Lamia. Its skin was tougher than the weapons of mortals, and thus could not be killed by them. The lion was eventually killed by Heracles during one of his 12 labors. These are the children of Echidna and Typhon. It is sometimes said that the father and mother of monsters had other children, in addition to the already mentioned ones. Some of them include the Caucasian eagle that fed every day on the ever-regenerating liver of the Titan, Prometheus, till it was killed by Heracles, and then the gigantic flesh-eating Crommyonian sow, which was killed by the hero, Theseus.
In the eerie caverns deep beneath Olympus, close to the entrance of the underworld, resided 3 female monsters of untold hideousness. Monsters with awful scaly skin, hands made of brass, fangs more like tusks, talons of ire, serpent coils as legs, poisonous snakes as hair, and eyes of death itself. So horrifying were they, that a mere gaze upon them petrified anyone to death, and turned them into stones. The Gorgons, children of the sea, daughters of the deep.
Stheno the fierce, Stheno the strong, the immortal Gorgon, who never aged. The daughter of the sea deity, Phorcys, and the goddess of the deep, Ceto, she was the eldest of the 3 Gorgons. Stheno was the most independent of her Gorgon sisters, Euryale and Medusa. Her strength surpassed that of her sisters, and her ferocity belittled their own. She was bloodthirsty and always eager to kill, so much so that she killed many more men than both of her sisters combined. In appearance, Stheno was thin and tall, with an upper body that resembled that of a woman, and the lower body of a huge snake. She had red scaly skin, a long protruding tongue, and red snakes curling around her scaly head, in place of hair. She had eyes which glowed in the dark, and turned anyone who looked upon them into stones. Around her waist was a long snake, tied as a belt. The later Roman depictions took away some of the Gorgons' hideousness, showing Stheno and her sisters as beautiful women with snake hair, combining the urge to behold their beauty with the fear of instant death. Aside Euryale and Medusa, Stheno had other siblings, who were not Gorgons. Some were still monsters, some were hags, and some were nymphs. They include the Hesperides, the Grae, Medusa, Scylla, and Ladon. Stheno never left her dark home, in the caverns. Hidden by the darkness, she and her sisters laid in wait for unwary travelers, and those foolish enough to enter the caverns. With the great strength of a cuttlefish, and her intense urge to kill, most of the intruders and men who wandered into the caverns possibly met their cruel deaths at the hands of Stheno. In popular versions of Greek mythology, Stheno and her two sisters were not born Gorgons, but were beautiful women who served in the temple of Athena. When Medusa, the most beautiful of the three, became boastful, she caught the attention of Poseidon, lord of the seas, who then laid with her right before the statue of Athena. Athena punished Medusa by turning her into an ugly Gorgon. And when Stheno and Euryale tried to defend their sister, the goddess also turned them into Gorgons. After the death of their mortal sister, Stheno and Euryale continued to live, as they were immortal and could not die. It is often said that the two relocated to the underworld, where they were used by Hades to torment the dead.
In the eerie caverns deep beneath Olympus, close to the entrance of the underworld, resided three female monsters of untold hideousness. Monsters with awful scaly skin, hands made of brass, fangs more like tusks, talons of ire, serpent coils as legs, poisonous snakes as hair, and eyes of death itself. So horrifying were they, that a mere gaze upon them petrified anyone to death, and turned them into stones. The Gorgons, children of the sea, daughters of the deep.
Euryale, the fast bringer, the wide leaper, the squid-like one. Born after Stheno, and before Medusa, she was the second eldest of the Gorgons. The daughter of the sea god Phorcys, and the goddess of the deep, Ceto, she was also the sister to Ladon, Medusa, the Hesperides, the Grae, and the six-headed Scylla. Euryale neither had the might of Stheno, nor the wits of Medusa, but she was the fastest and the most agile of them. She could spring to great heights with ease, and cover far distances with just a single leap. Thus, she was called the Far Leaper. With loud deafening cries that echoed through the caves, and terrifying death bellows that reverberated through the earth, she was the loudest of the sisters, the noisiest of the three. Like the Gorgon she was, Euryale had the hands of bronze, the lower body of a snake, skin covered with scales, sharp tusks as fangs, long snaky tongue, hair of living venomous snakes, and glowing eyes which turned people to stones. As a distinct physical feature, however, Euryale had tough knuckles instead of claws. Her skin was of grey or violet color, and the snakes on her head were of the same greyish or violet color. Like her elder sister Stheno, she was an immortal Gorgon, who neither grew old nor died. Born in the caves beneath Mount Olympus, Euryale rarely ever left her home. With her Gorgon sisters, she hid in the darkness of the caves, away from the light, laying waste to any victim who trespassed into their territory. In a different version of the myth, the three Gorgons were once maidens who served the virgin goddess, Athena. When the pretty Medusa incurred the wrath of Athena by being defiled, she was transformed into a Gorgon, along with Euryale and Stheno, who stood with her. Being too ugly for the world, they withdrew to the dark caverns. After the mortal Medusa was beheaded by Perseus, it was Euryale's death-bellowing screams that drew the attention of Stheno. They both tried to avenge their sister's death, but failed, because Perseus was aided by the gods. With the loss of one of their own, it is said that the immortal two, Euryale and Stheno, found a new home in the underworld as servants of Hades, tormenting the souls of the dead, at their master's will.
In the eerie caverns deep beneath Olympus, close to the entrance of the underworld, resided three female monsters of untold hideousness. Monsters with awful scaly skin, hands made of brass, fangs more like tusks, talons of ire, serpent coils as legs, poisonous snakes as hair, and eyes of death itself. So horrifying were they, that a mere gaze upon them petrified anyone to death, and turned them into stones. The Gorgons, children of the sea, daughters of the deep.
Medusa, guardian of the caves, the Gorgon queen, reigning supreme, not by might, nor by power, but by wits, by wisdom, by charm and beauty. The most famous Gorgon in all of Greek mythology, Medusa is seen in many different lights. To some, she was a terror of nature, a hideous creature with glaring eyes, evil, dreadful, and terrifying, with hatred for mortal man. And to some, she was a victim of ill fate, the one who was both a monster and a beauty, the fairest of the Gorgons. Medusa was the daughter of Phorcys, the old man of the sea, and Stheno, the monster goddess of the deep, and the sister to Stheno, Euryale, the Graii, Scylla, Ladon, Medusa, and the Hesperides. She was also the youngest of the three Gorgons. According to early myths, Medusa was a born monster, deadly and hateful, hideous in appearance, the most terrifying of her sisters, with hair of living snakes, hands and claws of bronze, boar tusks as fangs, the lower body of a snake, and a gaze so piercing that it turned people to stones. While according to later poets like Ovid and Pindar, Medusa was not born a Gorgon, but was very different from her monstrous sisters and family. In these myths, she was born a fair maiden, and not a monster, lovely to behold, and not frightful, greatly attractive, and not repulsive. With hair of golden locks, a face so charming, and eyes which sparkled like stars, she was a ravishing beauty, the desire of many suitors. A common detail shared by these various myths, though, was that, alas, Medusa was a mere mortal, the only one among her sisters who was not gifted with immortality, thus, she could be killed by the weapons of man. The fair Medusa was once the servant of Athena, serving in the temple of the virgin goddess. Wherever she went, she was admired for her beauty, praised for her pretty looks. Soon, the showers of praises began to get to her head, and Medusa gradually became boastful, likening herself to Athena, comparing her beauty to that of the goddess. She believed her hair was prettier, and her face was lovelier. One day, her golden locks caught the attention of the sea god Poseidon, who immediately lusted after her. At the coming of dusk, Poseidon quietly crept into the temple and seduced Medusa, mating with her in the sacred temple, defiling her in front of the virgin goddess's statue. When dawn came, Athena appeared before Medusa, ready to unleash her wrath. The Lord of the Seas was blameless and could not be punished, so Athena directed her anger towards her defiled servant, the mortal Medusa. She turned Medusa's golden hair into poisonous snakes, and made her face so terrible to behold that the mere sight of it would turn anyone into stones. Medusa became uglier than her sisters, doomed to hide her ugliness away from the world for the rest of her days. In some stories, however, even as a Gorgon, Medusa remained beautiful. Even as a monster, her charms could still not be resisted, tempting men to meet her gaze and luring them to their deaths. In another version of the myth, Medusa's sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were also once beautiful maidens, and served alongside her in the temple of Athena. After turning Medusa into a Gorgon, as punishment for being defiled and being boastful, the goddess also turned Stheno and Euryale into Gorgons for standing with their sister. Medusa became pregnant with Poseidon's children after the incident at the temple. The Gorgon would later be slain by the hero, Perseus, and from her headless body, the winged Pegasus and the giant, Chrysaor, would be born.
The eerie caverns deep beneath Olympus, close to the entrance of the underworld, resided three female monsters of untold hideousness. Monsters with awful scaly skin, hands made of brass, fangs more like tusks, talons of ire, serpent coils as legs, poisonous snakes as hair, and eyes of death itself. So horrifying were they, that a mere gaze upon them petrified anyone to death, and turned them into stones. The Gorgons, children of the sea, daughters of the deep.
Many know the myth of the three Gorgons, but very few know of the very first Gorgon to exist in Greek mythology. Gorgo X, the elder Gorgon, the spirit of the stormy clouds. Gorgo X was an ancient Gorgon who existed when the world was still young, during the time of the ancient Titans, before the birth and reign of the Olympians. It was a monstrous goat, the alter ego of Amalthea, the goatish nurse of baby Zeus. Its name literally meant terrible goat, or fierce storm. Similar to the later Gorgons, Gorgo had living serpents as hair, tusks as fangs, and long lolling tongue. However, it had the body of a goat, an ugly flat nose, and was of indescribable gender. Gorgo could not be referred to as a he or a she, because it was neither male nor female. It was described as either a woman who had manly features, such as a beard, or a man with womanly attributes. Gorgo was an effeminate monster, and was sometimes said to be the mother or father of the three Gorgons. Prior to the 10-year-long war between the Titans and the gods, Gorgo had spent most of its life hidden away by Gaia in a secret Cretan cave, and during the war, the monstrous goat joined forces with the Titans, the enemies of the gods. Gorgo was slain at the start of the war by Zeus, who then used the goat skin to construct his famous aegis, placing its hideous head at the front of the shield. This possibly explains why Zeus already wielded an aegis decorated with a Gorgon's head long before the time and death of Medusa. Modeling after her father, Athena also placed the gift of Medusa's head on her own aegis, like father, like daughter. The images of Gorgons were carved on objects as protection against evil in the later times, supposedly due to their terrifying gaze. Now it is rather surprising, why would a creature which brought only death, terror, and misery be used as protection against evil? To some, there was nothing good about the Gorgon. It was like using evil to ward off evil. The reason lies in the myths themselves. The Gorgon was a creature of duality, and was not evil in its entirety. On one hand, and as itself, it sought to only satisfy its evil tendencies, and on the other hand, it became a tool against evil. Its blood was said to be the cure to all afflictions and plagues. With the Gorgon's head, Perseus felled the mighty Kraken, and ended the rule of the wicked king, Polydectes. In the hands of Asclepios, the blood drawn from the Gorgon's left side was used to end lives, and the blood drawn from the right was used to raise people from the dead. And in the hands of Erythonius, the 2 vials of the Gorgon's blood were used as a deadly poison, and the cure to all diseases. In addition, Sterope placed a lock of the Gorgon's hair in her hometown, Tegia, to protect it from enemies, and the lock cast great terror into any enemy who beheld it.